We have changing tracks a little bit, kind of a marriage between the policy and the technology. So we have Deepak Maheshwari from Norton Life and Symantec. He will be talking about how do we engage policymakers in the standard ecosystem and how we need to bring the two things together for the betterment of society. So he'll put like some Indian perspective on the policy and also the standard side that's been happening. Brief introduction: he's been involved in public policy for 2 decades. He co-founded NIXI and ITU APT Foundation. He also led IEEE Internet Initiatives, ISP India ISP Association. So he has a rich experience in the public policy thing. So we'll have a last word from Deepak first.
Thanks, Dhruv. So since morning when I came, I know Fred was just finishing his talk on history of internet, and so I've been involved a little bit on the history of internet in India, at least I'll say for about 22 years or so. So on 15 January 1998, the Government of India announced the internet policy, and I filed a petition against that in less than 24 hours, and we got some success. And finally on 6 November 1998, we got a much better internet policy, which is what more or less continues till date. So when Anurag, for example, was talking about some of the things in terms of routing, etc., and including the examples of SIFI. So yes, I actually worked in SIFI from 1999 to 2006, and that was the time when I served as Secretary of ISP Association, also co-founded NIXI at that time, way back in 2003. After that, I worked in a couple of startups called Microsoft and MasterCard, and then joined another startup called Symantec. So I was in Symantec for about 5.5 years, and last Monday, 4th November, there was a transaction that Broadband has acquired the business assets, enterprise business assets of Symantec. So now the new company where the company's new name is now NortonLifeLock. So that's where I'm working. It's a pretty long presentation, about 150 slides, but I'll try to manage quickly through that. Okay. So basically, one is I just want to give a broad overview of ICT policy landscape in India. Then within that, a little bit more specifically around standards, some case studies in the Indian perspective, and some of that, of course, has already been talked today by Nalini and also by Mohit, for example, around encryption, so some of that, and then some of the challenges and opportunities. Okay. So if we see in terms of the legislations, we have got multiple legislations in the country, like any other democracy. So we have got the Indian Telegraph Act 1885, and a lot of times people say that yes, this is a very, very old legislation, let's change it. But the fact is this: 1885 Indian Telegraph Act is so good I'm saying, in terms of especially the definition of the telegraph, the word telegraph in that when we had to introduce multiple new services in the 1990s, India, because before that, all that we had in terms of telegraph services in India was telegram, which many of the youngsters won't even have seen except in some old movies, okay? Not the telegram app, but the actual telegram on paper, okay? Using the Morse code. So yes, there used to be that service. There used to be fixed line service, lead line. There were some radio services, and of course some little bit of satellite services, etc. But in 90s, we actually started a lot of new telecom services in the country. So we introduced VSAT, we introduced internet access, we introduced email. Email के लिए license होता था हिंदुस्तान में. Okay, I used to work in a company which had a telecom license for email. Telecom department used to give license for email. Okay. Then paging, again something which has gone history. Just a few months back, a few weeks back, Japan had the last paging service, which shut down. Anyway, mobile, many other things. So we never had to revisit the definition of telegraph in that. And yes, I did go to an IIT long back, and then after 25 years of IIT, I also did a degree in law. But I'm not a practicing lawyer as such. But I do dare say that a good lawyer could even argue that even telepathy may need someday a telecom license, because after all it uses the Hertzian waves. Okay. So that good is a law in that sense. So yes, it does have certain quirks and other challenges in terms of right of way and some of the powers of the government in terms of surveillance, but otherwise in terms of the basic framework, it's a fantastic law. In fact, if you see around this region, apart from India, whether you look at Singapore, whether you look at Pakistan, you look at Malaysia, any of these legislations, everywhere it was originally the respective Telegraph Act, which had exactly the same language, because of course all of this came from the Britain at that time, and that was a legislation which actually got implemented in India on 1st of October 1885, and likewise elsewhere. Then of course we had another one called Information Technology Act 2000, another IT Act I call it. Of course we have another one called Income Tax Act, but we are not talking about that today. So this act of course became effective on 17th of October 2000. Then the National Cybersecurity Policy, which came in July 2013. National Policy on Electronics, National Policy on IT, both came into 2012. Then National Policy on Software Products, which came a few months back. National Digital Communication Policy, which came from last year from DOT in October. Then the Draft Data Protection Bill, which came in August last year for consultation. Of course, it had been put up on the website in July itself. And of course, right now the government has started some limited consultations at this time, not yet a public consultation, on a National Cybersecurity Strategy 2020, which is what will replace the 2013 cybersecurity policy. Then we have, of course, many state governments also talking about policy on IT, ICT, governance, etc. Because unlike telecom, which is only a central government subject, IT has become a de facto concurrent subject in the Indian Constitution, because you have state governments talking about IT and having IT secretaries, IT department, apart from of course the central government itself. So that's the broad policy landscape in terms of this thing if we see. Now, when we come to standards specifically, we have got multiple other things. So in the Ministry of Electronics and IT, we have got, so they are the ones who, for example, interact a lot with IETF. I hope that and pray that they should do more, but they have to do something. And they have also got some reasonable security practice rules, which were notified in 2011. They refer to ISO IEC 27001 as one of the standards for reasonable security practices. Then in the Ministry of Communications, we have TEC, Telecom Engineering Center. They are the ones who interact with ITUT. We've got a Telecom Standards Development Society of India. It's a recent development, about 5 years old organization, 4 or 5 years old. And so it's supported by the government, but also has some academic and private sector involvement. So they interact a lot with ITUT, CGPP, HC, IEEE, etc. Now, Ministry of Consumer Affairs has a body called Bureau of Indian Standards. So they work under the statute, but they are the ones principal liaison with ISO IEC JTC 1, Joint Technical Committee 1. And then Ministry of Commerce and Industry, so they have come out with the National IP Act policy a few years back, and that also refers to standards essential patents, and that again becomes very important when we are talking about the role of standards. And I did have a run-in about more than a decade back in one of the global exercise of a particular ISO IEC standards. And a lot of that had to do about SCPs at that point of time. Of course, the moment you search for, especially the legal contest or the legal litigation around patents, right now, of course, the mobile is one which will show you a crisscross that this company is suing this company is suing this, and almost everybody seems to be suing one another in a big way. And of course, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, they have the National Competition Policy, and that also refers to the role of standards in impact assessment. So that's again some of these policies that we need to be cognizant. The reason I chose this particular topic is this. Oftentimes what happens is the technologists keep on developing, keep on thinking about, okay, how to solve new problems, new technical problems, etc., new social problems, including social problems for that matter, with very little regard or understanding at that point of time about the public policy aspect. And sometimes when something is already developed, and once it starts getting implemented, or when it starts getting some traction or inaction for that matter, or some sort of adoption, at times we see these fissures which keep on coming between the policy and the technology, and that's what we should be cognizant of. So let me take a few specific examples now. So this is on encryption. I've been involved, fortunately or unfortunately, for about 20 years and 20 weeks in this country on policy related to encryption. So let me just go through it quickly. So on 6th of August 1999, the Department of Telecom announced that to ISPs, and I was working, as I said, with one of the ISPs, that you cannot use bulk encryption, and for more than 40 bit of encryption, you have to do the key escrow, and you also have to have the government's permission. Okay, fair enough. By the way, this was also the time, way back in 1998, US and some of the European countries which had actually earlier put the mandate about export restrictions of 40-bit and beyond that encryption at that point of time, they're just sort of doing away with those type of restrictions. And in India, we actually implemented it in a different manner. In 2000, the SEBI, which is the Securities Exchange Board of India, so they announced 64 or 128-bit for online trading. 2001, we had Reserve Bank, the central bank, coming out with 128-bit minimum for encryption. And by the way, whether you do online trading or internet banking, you have to use internet. IRCTC has been doing the online ticket booking for trains. They have been using 128-bit right from day one. Ministry of Home Affairs, in 2008, we had this major challenge around BlackBerry using encryption for their enterprise mail and messaging, etc. And the government wanted them to have a server, and finally the government claims that at one point of time they said that they have already cracked it, but they finally forced BlackBerry to put a server. It's a different thing. By the time this server was put here, BlackBerry as a service provider or as a major provider did not continue in that shape at that point of time. In 2008, we had the IETF amendment, and then which had a section 84A, which says that the government can set rules for encryption. And in 2009, the decryption rules were notified. Basically, it's called a rules for interception, monitoring, and decryption. So those were notified in 2009. In 2010, interestingly, so the same DoD which said you cannot use more than 40 bit on the internet, the same DoD, when they had to do spectrum auction in 2010, they started using only 2048-bit encryption on the internet. Okay. Then in 2015, we had draft encryption policy on 18th of September. It was released in the public domain on a Friday evening. On Tuesday evening, there was so much of hue and cry in India and globally that within 4 days the government actually withdrew it. And in 2016, again they did a selective consultation. Again, we don't know what happened after that. And in August 2017, the Supreme Court held privacy as a fundamental right, and obviously that means that India should be able to use good quality, high-end encryption. And 2018, we had the data protection bill, and 2019, just a few weeks back, we had this whole thing around the Pegasus spyware and NSOG group, etc. But the basic point is this, that on one hand, the same government that says don't, so it is something like this. You're driving on a road, you see two different signage. One says you cannot drive more than 40 miles an hour, another one says you can't drive less than 128 miles an hour, or whatever the other limit could be. Can you comply with both? Is it possible? One says you cannot drive more than 40, the other one says less than 128 is not allowed. The fact is you can comply with both if you don't drive. But the real challenge is that even that right, that opportunity, that right not to drive is also being taken away, because now the government is forcing us to do many things only online. Okay? So in that sense, willy-nilly, we will be, including the government itself, will be non-compliant on one or more of these type of policies. Okay? So that's one. Now let's come to something else. On 26th of May 2004, we had a new Minister of Communications and IT, Mr. Dayanidhi Maran. He announced a 10-point agenda. And these were 2 points from his agenda. India will migrate to IPv6 by 2006. You can see this, you can search for this and you can find this, okay? The reality is that many ISPs in India continue to cling, and I am deliberately using the word, continue to cling to IPv4 addresses. And they still feel that no, we should get more, we should be charged less, etc., etc. And of course, MIXI is the National Internet Registry that also gives IPv6 addresses now. And the other statement that he made on that very day was, India will leapfrog from 2G directly to 4G bypassing 3G, totally. Okay? In reality, what happened is 3G services started in India in 2008 and 4G started in 2012, and that's where we are. So I think what is happening is sometimes when the policymakers come out with some predictions or projections or their own plans in terms of coming out with new policies, they may not have good understanding of how technology itself works or is working or is what is the current state of development or deployment. So at times maybe the technology which is available, which has been technically mature, but at times it could be that financially it may be unviable, or at times it could be that something which is not even technically mature. For example, right now a lot of people do talk about 5G. The fact is, on 5G, on the other hand, we keep on hearing that some of the protocols on the 5G are yet to be standardized. So that's one more scenario. Now, the way forward I would say is this, that on one hand, the policy makers need to be aware of process of developing technical standards and adoption at global level. Also look at what are the other agencies or regulators are doing. So for example, within India, if one department says the Department of Telecom, which is what does the internet licensing, they say don't use more than 40 bit. On the other hand, Reserve Bank of India says for internet banking, don't use less than 128 bit. Now this type of dichotomy, at least within the country, we should avoid this type of situation, at least within the country, preferably globally. And the role of private sector contributions, even as more awareness around public sector R&D and academia are needed, because many times the role, the moment it comes to standards, so whether you look at BIS committees, any of these committees, usually they are chaired by somebody, who is a very senior person from the government or from academia, and they may have a sort of a retired or something. Anurag, can you just give 2 minutes and after that, okay. And so that's one thing. So there's very little consideration about private sector contribution in these standards development. On the other hand, I would say as technologists sitting here and elsewhere, we also need to engage more in public policy, consultations, drafts, responding to those type of things, because when we see something which is not really doing well in terms of how technology works or should be working and how the governments are doing, there's a problem there. And also look at the participation in the national bodies and contribute therein. So for example, BIS has got different committees. I mean, no matter how they have been formed, but they are there. And they do the PAS and other type of consultations based on the ISO IEC thing. At TSDS, I keep on doing something. Cloud Computing Innovation Council of India, they keep on doing something in India. But there's very little involvement, I'll say, of the broader industry in that sense. And one of the important things is that both need to evolve common syntax and frameworks of reference, and if not the common syntax, at least some sort of interoperability across these two regimes in terms of what we are saying something and what they are saying something, and to what extent these things are matching with each other. The last slide? Okay. So this is a take on Rudyard Kipling's famous East is East and West is West. Is policy and tech is tech. If twain don't meet, we are in for a recession. Thank you. So, yeah.
I have two questions. One is on this 40-bit thing. I have heard it multiple times. I was curious, what does the regulation say? Is it about that greater than 40-bit is not allowed to pass through network, or it's about the website and the content hosted by the ISPs, which is negligible?
Okay. So it is basically about data in transit, number one, because it's under the ISP license. Number two, it was 6th of August 1999 when this thing came. Till date, although it did talk about escrow, and I'm no big supporter of escrow, no, not at all. But the fact is, it said two things. One, you will need government's permission, the telecom authority's permission, and second is that you will deposit the key pair in escrow, okay? Good or bad, let's leave that aside. The fact is, if the government has a certain policy, it needs to be operationalized, because do I need to print it? Do I need to put it on a floppy or a CD or a pen drive? In what form? Till date, it is yet to be notified. Interestingly, from 2010, when we moved to the unified licensing regime, in the new licenses, from the same department, the new licenses do not have this particular mandate, although they still have this language that do not use bulk encryption. That's it. So no bulk encryption.
Which is very vague, considering that ISPs are just carrying traffic. So
I know, but that's how it is.
The other related part was it was quite detailed list you had on the slide of whatever change happened over time. Do you know where the LIM thing came in? The lawful interception device, which is connected on the gateways of large ISPs in Mumbai.
Okay, so It started actually way back in 2000 itself, 2000 I'm saying, because the first thing that happened was that as ISPs were allowed to set up satellite gateways in the first instance, and in January 2000, I think, if my memory serves right, and on 30th of August 2000, the government had announced the policy for submarine cable also. Okay, so that those things did happen in India. But what happened when we were putting satellite gateways? We were asked to make two different payments to other agencies. One was to NOCC, which was Network Operation Control Center, which was a satellite thing of DOT, some 9 lakh rupees per gateway. And the other one was that we had to make a 4 lakh rupees payment at that point of time. This I am talking of 2000 to 2003 in that time frame, to CDOT. And CDOT had developed a sort of a, let's say, interception mechanism or some sort of thing. We had to give a 100 square feet room with a lock, etc., for which the key they would have, and I had a tough time explaining that in case there's a fire or something, what it is that we will do. I mean, okay, so they would come and they had put a small, I think it was a Pentium server at that point of time, some 50 GB hard disk or around that type of thing. And finally,
I saw such a room very recently, maybe 2 years ago, in one of the large data centers in India.
Maybe. So I put up 13 such gateways in India, and by the way, all of those satellite gateways were given provisional permission to operate. I don't think any of them finally got a final approval, because by the time they would have already got that, we already had more than enough fiber in the country in that sense, in terms of bandwidth, the international bandwidth. By the way, just wanted to mention one thing. Do you guys know when did India get its first, and I'm being very specific, its first submarine cable in India? When did it land? Any idea? Any guesses?
1995.
No, 1870. 1870.
Copper cables, huh?
1870, I'm not joking, 1870. I've got pictures of that also. I've written also about it, okay? And there were 4 German brothers who were given the contract by the British Crown to set up a telegraph link between London and Kolkata, where we are, because this was the national capital at that time of the undivided Britain, of India, undivided India, and undivided Britain also nowadays, of course, one can say. But the interesting thing that happened was, they actually originally had to come to the Horn of Africa, but another private sector initiative helped them to come much faster, which was the Suez Canal. Okay? And thanks to that, something which used to take 1 month minimum on a horseback from Calcutta to London those days, including whatever ship, etc., it started happening in 28 minutes, which exactly is 1500 times more efficient. So I have actually written an article about this. How did 4 German brothers leverage Suez Canal 150 years back in India to improve telecom efficiency by 1500 times 150 years back?
Thank you.
Back up 2 slides if you would.
Sure. Which one?
Your recommendations, that.
Yes.
No, forward 2.
Next one.
One more. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Go forward.
Oh, okay.
Your recommendation.
Okay. Yeah.
There.
This one.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, because there are too many of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we went through a lot of that in the United States, and I can only reflect on the things I was involved in, of course, but let me pass that along because it might be interesting to you. Our policymakers are in the FCC, and you probably read about them in the press the same way I do. The FCC commissioners, 2 from one party, 3 from the other, it changes, but
Yeah, I know.
that's the ratio. Forever have questions. What in the world is going on in technology? And what in the world should we lay down dead and whatever? And it's very difficult for them to ask technologists a question, because then they have to have a contractual relationship and da-da-da-da. So they came up with something that they called the Broadband Internet Technology Advisory Group, which I contributed to. And what they would do is they would basically go have parties. Let's stand around with alcohol in our hands And the FCC guys would wonder, what would happen if, and the lawyers for BitTag were standing around in the room saying, gee, they're asking this question, but they're not asking us, maybe we should produce a result. And so we would go write something about that the FCC could use, but would bypass this law about having a contractual relationship. The papers that BitTag produced wound up directly referenced in the things that came out of the FCC. So, it was useful to them. It was crazy, but it was useful to them. One of the nice things about that was we essentially did what you said. One of the crazy things was they still made really crazy policies. So which is to say that I think the way forward there includes figuring out a way to enable them to talk to each other. As opposed to let's standardize at a party and wonder out loud, this kind of a thing. I think that's a very good recommendation that you're making, but having done it, that's the next thing that I would say is make sure that you can sit down and talk frankly about what if something happens and what do you do next?
Sure. So whether it was, so for example, I remember I met Reed Hunt about 20 years back, and then I wrote something about spectrum management in 2001 November, where the first point was that we should have a national spectrum register, which is, so I never thought about that idea. That idea came from Reed, and then Tony Wheeler or others for that matter. So we've sort of had interactions with many people in FCC, including the staff as well as some of the commissioners. Of course, Ajit Pai also, he was here in India last year. But the other thing is this, we also, for example, under the aegis of one of the large industry associations in India called CII, which is like US Chamber in a way. So way back in 2003-04, many companies came together, including SIFI, including Bharti, including some of the others. But interestingly, we also had people like Warburg Pincus, the PE company, the private equity company, because at that point of time, they were one of the major investors in Bharti, and they had some other interests. So in 2004, October, we released a report, 2-volume big report on India's broadband economy 2010. So whatever projections, this is the investment, these are the policies, etc. So that thing we did. Interestingly, the Indian telecom regulator, TRAI, the day we released our report, and we already sort of had shared informally the draft, etc. with them, within a few days they published their own recommendation on broadband in India. And those recommendations were nothing but actually this almost ditto as whatever was coming out with the CII thing. And interestingly, this particular task force that we did, we had not only contribution from private sector, we also had contribution from the government. So half of the money came from the government operators, the telcos, BSNL and MTNL that time. And after that, on 14th of October 2004, we had the new national broadband policy. Unfortunately, when the government announced the policy, because in India, unlike FCC, which is the regulator as well as licensor, in India, the telecom regulator is only a regulator and not a licensor. So licensing continues to be with something like an NTIA in India, in that sense. And so that's the Department of Telecom. So they are the ones who, when they announced the policy, it actually had nothing new except, so they picked up all the targets that we had put up in that policy, but not the measures that we had set to achieve those targets. So sometimes these things do happen.
They do happen.
You are by far the most popular. It's a question. Thank you, it's really good. And I hope the Internet Society is doing something to bridge this gap that you're talking about. I had a quick and a longer question. The quick one is TSDSI. You listed a lot of standards organizations that it is interested in, and one of them that's not in that list is IETF, and I wondered if there's a reason beyond it's hard for governments to participate as governments in the IETF.
So I don't think that's the problem. I think the basic challenges in terms of bandwidth within TSDSI, it's a relatively new organization, and I am saying even at this platform, that there's all the more reason, and this is one of the reasons that I listed TSDSI, because normally I would have just listed the ministries and others, not TSDSI, but TSDSI, the very reason is that I think it is important for IETF also to reach out to TSDSI in this engagement. Interestingly, the chair of the TSDSI happens to be one of the directors, he's a senior academician from one of the IITs. So he is a member of IEEE, he is a member of IETF, I am sure he is a member of some of the other, would have contributed in many of these things, CGPP, etc. But within India, I think it's important for us to reach out to them. Same way, for example, the Ministry of Electronics and IT, and let me tell you the other side also. So Ministry of Electronics and IT, recently, because as I was mentioned by Dhruv, so I was the global chair of IEEE Internet Initiative. I am also even currently an advisor to the Global Public Policy Committee of IEEE. And Ministry of Electronics and IT, they do, so IEEE guys keep going to them, but the Standards Association of IEEE, they do not have much of interaction as of now with Ministry of Electronics and IT, whereas IETF does have. So I think in many cases it's an issue of bandwidth and focus on who is doing what. But that was one of my ideas, was to just map out some of the broad stakeholders in the country and then see what makes more sense for us to go here. And then you had a slightly longer question.
Well, the question is shorter, but the answer is probably longer. I'm reminded of a Mel Gibson film, What Women Want. And I wonder how we can get the policymakers to tell the standards makers what the policymakers want.
Yes. So two things that come to my mind immediately is, one, that earlier in India, most of the policies, they were not public consultation, earlier. Even today, we don't, unlike in the US, there are certain federal legislations and many of the states also have this mandate that these have to be published in the Federal Register for consultation, you have to give so much of time, etc. But some of the agencies in India have started doing more. And most of these consultations are actually happening in the digital space, I would say, unlike many of the other sectors in the country. So many others also do it. For example, Central Bank in India, they do a lot of consultation and many others. But I'll say in the digital space they do, although we wish that they should do it more and more institutionalized manner. So one is that when those things are happening, and I think Anupam, what we need to look at is, Anupam and Dhruv, that when these type of consultations are happening, I think in some of those places we can give some specific response even from IETF, maybe India or global or in whichever manner, or even from IESOC in some manner. So that was one. Second is also that when these type of that we can actually proactively suggest certain things, that okay, this is how you should go about. Usually in India, most of these things are reactive, that government comes out with a draft and then the stakeholders respond to that. And that's why I said about national cybersecurity strategy, for example. I know because I have made a presentation to that particular task force twice, one as Symantec, once as the chair of a particular trade association cybersecurity committee. So I know about that. Process is on, and it's in the public domain in the sense that the chair of the head of the national cybersecurity in India, he has mentioned it publicly that we are developing this, we have set up a task force. But as on date, we do not have a formal process about consultation because they have yet to come out with a draft or issue of list.
Yeah, wanted to make a quick comment. So there are a bunch of consultations that happen, like for example, data protection. So as part of an organization called Zoomka, which is a car rental company, and data protection actually affected us. So we did make a proposal, and especially I feel the TRAI actually has been very proactive in doing this consultation. And even if IETF or even ISOC chapters want to do that, actually it's very open. You as an organization or even as an individual can actually do that. So lots of people may not know that. I just wanted to mention that.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, I've been participating in the TRA things since 1997 when it started. So yes, and TRA is actually mandated in law that they should do consultation, and that's why they do more than others. Yeah.
So quick question, that the GTC one which you mentioned, that is under Ministry of Consumer Affairs, while it is dealing with ICT standards.
Okay. So that's okay. Basically, it's like this. Bureau of Indian Standards is the national standards body in India.
Right.
And that is under the Ministry of Consumer Affairs because it was basically around quality and safety and those type of issues. So if you see, they've got more than 2,000 standards, but out of which only about 85 of them are mandatory. For example, things around pressure cooker or gas stove and helmets, etc. Some of them, others are not. And many of these standards come from ISO and IEC at a global level. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about IT is this, that when it comes to intergovernmental organizations, you have ISO, IEC and IT. All three happen to be, the trinity happens to be neighbors in Geneva. Okay, all the three are headquartered there. Interesting thing was that when IEC had a lot of standards traditionally on the electric side, on the battery and generators and many other things, and electricity distribution, etc. ISO had some stuff around IT for a long time. After some time, they realized that when it came to the issue of IT, that okay, this is something which something is happening there, and finally they decided to form this JTC1, which was great. And after JTC1 came, because ISO and IEC both are being interacted by BIS in India, that's how it continues till date. Ministry of Electronics and IT, if you see the business allocation rules, it does not talk about standards at all. Ministry of Telecom, yes, because they did have TEC, so they continue to do with ITUT. And that's why I'm saying that there is a challenge, especially in the digital space. So we have been talking about convergence ever since March 1999, formally in the country, in terms of having a national NTP 99 for the first time recognized the concept of convergence. But the fact is, in India, we have a separate Ministry of Communications, a separate Ministry of IT, a separate Ministry of INB, and of course, I did not even mention the Department of Science and Technology right now has actually undertaking a study on ICT standards. Right now, they have commissioned a study by a think tank. I've been involved in that. If you are interested, I'll connect you with those guys. Okay. So there's a challenge in that.
I manage the subcommittee 7 on software and systems engineering.
So there are those committees.
So a quick point there is that we did a study on behalf of Indian national body that what are the different challenges being faced by the ISO subcommittees globally. And out of the 29 subcommittees which are functioning now, approximately the chair of 20 subcommittees have said that within the ISO process it is very difficult for them to create agile standards like an agile standards in 6 months or 12 months. Whereas the ISO process takes
12 months is an understatement in ISO.
ISO is an understatement. So they are looking forward to a larger engagement with bodies like IETF or WCC. So maybe this is the time that we start engaging.
So one suggestion is what we should do is perhaps we should go back to Ministry of Electronics and IT and ask them to formally put up a standards division. So they have an IPR division, they have some of the others, but within that perhaps they should start a standards division in this. That would be one tangible thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Abhijan Bhattacharya from TCS Innovation Lab. So since there was a comment like ITF and TSDSI connecting together, personally I have been trying to convince this to my hierarchy that when you talk about 5G, it is not just there are 2 layers. It is not just 3GPP. You need all the layers to optimize. And if there is any suggestion how it can be done, you please, I'll be interested to know.
Sure.
Because PCS is part of the whole TSDSI ecosystem and the 5G application layer. In fact, I am involved in the meetings and the documents generated in 5G application layer standardization.
So one specific thing that I would say is, for example, recently we had the India Mobile Congress just last month in Delhi. So there was, and the focus was actually about 5G. And one thing that I would say is perhaps to ask TSDSI to maybe do a joint small event or maybe a small round table, and it could be hosted even in CDOT headquarters, so that we don't have to bother too much about budgets, etc. Include people like Vipin Tyagi because he is an important interlocutor, include people like Bhaskar Ramamurthy and Abhay Karandikar from academia, and then of course our friend Pamela, because she is the Secretary General of
Yes.
One follow-up comment is that when we talk about 3G or 5G, somehow the mindset gets stuck to 3GPP. and that
Yeah.
is something is.
No, I agree. So when it comes to IoT, they talk only about 1 and 2 and nothing else. Okay, so I'm very familiar with these aspects. By the way, many people in India right now, just like the minister at that time in 2004 had said, that we'll skip 3G and go directly to 4G. Many of the people are saying, what is 5G? Let's work on 6G and 7G and 10G or whatever. So there are those discussions, and in Delhi I keep on sort of being part of this type of interesting discussion.
So I'll be looking forward to it.
Thank you.
So this is partly a comment to you, also a response to Adrian. Adrian, you suggested that maybe policymakers should tell the technologists what they'd like to see in the network. I have met with the Colonel General who runs Department K in the Ministry of Interior in Russia, which is to say cybercrime. I met with Mossad. I have met with the Minister of IT here in Delhi, and so on and so forth. And oh, by the way, my own FCC. They would love to tell the technologists what they want, and as a matter of fact, they try really hard to do so. And they all disagree. Which, as a technologist, as at the time chair of the IETF, found that very difficult to translate into, okay, we should do something. And I wound up turning around and trusting the technologists to do things that were hopefully right. And then talking with the policy people about the policies about how to use them. I found that to be a more productive approach. So now I'm curious how you would approach that.
So let me just give you a couple of examples. So one was in India, there's a lot of focus on inclusion, on taking internet to masses, to rural areas, etc. So if there's something what we can present that, okay, this, if you do this, this is what is your broad objective. So the government is right now talking about having a $5 trillion overall economy by 2025 or whatever time. Right now we are close to 3 trillion at this point of time. And with our inflation and other things, so they are looking at 5 trillion in a few years' time. But the more interesting thing is, on 20th February this year, the government released a report with McKinsey. It's a thick report. It's about 300 pages long, which is about India's $1 trillion trillion dollar digital opportunity or something like that. Okay. So basically, what it means is that by the time India reaches the 5 trillion economy, 20% of that will be digital economy, and that's pretty huge. And that 20%, if there's one minister for communication and IT, I mean there are two different ministries, but there's a common guy who is heading these. So he has to be sort of conveyed that 20% you have to contribute in a way your ecosystem in this broader thing. So not just look at ICT as a vertical thing, telecom, IT alone, but also what is it that it can do in agriculture and education and health and other stuff. And that's where if you can show some use cases, etc., it can help. So let me just give you two quick examples. So way back in 2003, in India you could not use Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. And I'm not saying that you could not use just because spectrum was not allowed. If somebody was using it, you could actually be put behind the bars because India had illegal. It was illegal in India to use frequency hopping technology those days. So what we did was there was a UN ICT task force and there was a Media Lab Asia, which was with the Negroponte's Media Lab there, and they had set up some kiosks, etc. And then Minister was sort of going and visiting these. And I talked to the researchers who were working on this project, and it so happened that I knew one of the guys for decades. He was from my school, we were studied together. So I told him, yes, it's a great thing that you are doing, but it's illegal in the country. So the minister came. Minister appreciated, okay, this is the type of rural connectivity that you are providing, etc., using Wi-Fi, tweaking it a little bit, stack here. And then suddenly, this guy said, yes, sir, but as per the rules, this is illegal. And then, because both the Secretary of Telecom and IT were with him, and this was something which we had already been pursuing, that day, I will say, was the trigger when things got accelerated. Second thing, Adrian, you mentioned a lot about VPNs. And so, in 2004, I was working with an ISP, SIFI in India, as was mentioned earlier. And we we won 2 tenders from the public sector insurer and a public sector bank for VPN connectivity across their different branches in the country, and we were one of the largest NTLS implementers in Asia outside Japan at that time. Now this is something which irked the incumbent telco, which were state-owned companies. And they said, because we did not have our own last mile, they said, okay, we won't give you the last mile to this company for this type of connectivity, etc., etc. So we went to the government, and the government said, no, you cannot offer VPN under this license. So I threw the rule book on their face, because the Telecom Engineering Center had their own standard on VPN, which says that VPN is the new age technologies to connect blah blah blah, etc. Lo and behold, a few weeks later, they amended silently the standards from the Telecom Engineering Center, leave aside the Y.1211 and Y.1210 from ITUT, which is what it had referred to in terms of VPN layer 2. And they said that this is something which ISPs cannot be allowed. However, we found some sort of a via media by 2005 end, but for almost 1.5 years there was a challenge, and I still remember one of the editorial in the magazine Voice and Data was VPN as very painful notification. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so,
Yeah.
people are telling me to make it quick. They see me coming, I'm like, make it quick. Okay. So I wanted to clarify a couple things. Again, this is reacting a little bit to Adrian. You know, the community is quite involved at IETF.
Yes.
Actually, quite involved. In fact, Deepak and I
We met IETF.
Yeah, we went to, last, I think.
And they're coming here tomorrow. They're coming here tomorrow.
Yeah, and then, November, and Deepak and I went to the ministry and
Last
met
year.
with the minister last year. And then in March of this year, actually, ministry, they helped coordinate a meeting with Reserve Bank of India, who called all the other banks, because they wanted me to tell them, what is this TLS 1.3 thing I hear? What, you know, so they have been quite, and we sit down and talk to them. So now, I'm going to say this real quick, and then we can all talk about it later. And I wanted to suggest a couple things, okay? One is maybe Deepak can get a crew together and we can have IIESOC Delhi, which kind of deals with this kind of thing, what I call the intersection of policy and technology. Who better than Deepak to head that up? And the second thing is Mumbai, Pune.
Yes.
Mumbai, Pune, there is a great many enterprises. The Reserve Bank of India, there's a lot of other banks, also Reliance. And so I think it would be very, very powerful, because this is a vision. Let's see if it works. The vision is Bangalore is the epicenter for the what do you call the development, And then Kolkata is kind of epicenter for academia and a number of other, this kind of thing. Then policy and and technology in Delhi, and then enterprises in Mumbai, Pune. Okay, so now I'm going to sit down.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think I'm the last one. So this is an idea from the point which you made that the first cable connection was to Calcutta in 1870. So we submitted a proposal from ISOC Calcutta quite some time back to Ministry of IT for a cable landing station in Calcutta. So how does that work out? What really happens?
I don't know about that, but look at this way. Way back on 13th of August 2000, that's when the government announced the policy. Okay, so any ISP in the country is allowed to do that. That's it. So it's the ISP's decision. So if an ISP finds a viable thing, so let me give you one specific example. Earlier in India, we had the cable OFC, the optical fiber connectivity only in Mumbai. Okay, with flags, and the CMEV, etc. came. The second one, where did it land? Flag in Kochi. Second one was in Kochi. But today, where is the maximum? It's in Chennai. Why? Because first it was Bharti and Singtel. They connected the world's largest theoretical 8.4 terabyte capacity way back in 2001 or 2. They commissioned the cable, theoretical capacity. And then Tata Com also invested in one more cable. So today in India, we have Chennai in a big way, we have Kochi, which has not really augmented beyond that, and plus a few more cables landing to Mumbai. Then in addition to that, we have got some additional connectivity in the northeast, which is terrestrial. Okay?
So that has come from Bangladesh.
Yeah, I know. So that's terrestrial. Okay. Now, as far as Kolkata is concerned, if it makes sense for BSNL, maybe yes. If it makes for Tatacom, if it makes sense for any of the ISPs for that matter.
So it is ISP's
Yes.
consortium which actually...
No, not necessarily consortium. Individual ISPs can apply for it, and once they get the permission, they have to lay it, and that's it. That's it.
Okay.
So it's the government's policy is open. The government's policy is open. Of course, it has got some security considerations, etc. But government's policy, I mean, if somebody wants to set up in Kolkata, there's no, I don't think there will be any objection from the government. If somebody has to see whether there's a business case for that. And personally, if you ask me, although I'm co-founder of Nixie and I did did the recce even before the Kolkata Nixie node was set up, but I did maintain, and today I maintain it even more strongly, that Nixie does not really need so many nodes in the country. Looking at the way our lease line rates are today. There was a time when the lease line rates were very high, so this was a different scenario. Today, in today's scenario, probably we should not have more than 3 or 4 nodes around the country. We need not have this 10 or 12 or whatever nodes that they claim to have. Some of them have hardly any traffic.
So out of 10, 6 are already non-functioning. So
It has to do with the traffic policy, but
not just traffic policy, but also look at this way, Anurag. What happens is, let's say there is a large ISP which has multiple nodes. Okay, so for example, I was in SIFI. We had multiple nodes, including in Chandigarh. Okay, they said we have set up in Chandigarh. Please announce your route. We said no. I've got a fat pipe already coming from Chandigarh to Delhi. Why would I announce my Chandigarh traffic in Chandigarh? I'll give it in Delhi. So the guy in Chandigarh, if he wants to carry it from Delhi through Nixie, I have no problem. But I don't want to spend additional money in Chandigarh. That was our.
See, remember, the traffic which is being exchanged at Nixie is primarily ISP to ISP. It's little bit of content of data centers which took the ISP license, but that's it. And that's not the traffic. In my presentation, I mentioned 20 ASN. None of those 20 are at Nixie.
I fully agree. By the way,
so if that policy is changed, which they are working on, which they
the
are
policy has been changed. Policy has been changed.
Okay.
Policy has been changed. I've been talking about that policy change for several years because I'm a life member, unfortunately or fortunately for Nixie. Okay. So policy, what has changed is this. Earlier the policy says that you need to be an ISP licensee from the Department of Telecom to get connected to Nixie. Now the policy also says that you can also be an Indian entity having your own ASN. Now I think the challenge is going to be what is an Indian entity having your own ASN. So your ASN fine, but what is an Indian entity? I don't know how they are going to define that. So. But that policy has been approved by the general body meeting, that I know.
Sure, that's a good thing. So having Nixie in more than 4 places actually would make sense, as long as that's the case. And with large content players putting up caching nodes, that would add to great value. So think about it, large content networks with their caching nodes and Nixie in far places like Northeast, along with super cheap GPON systems, that adds to significant capacity. So I would strongly suggest you again think about having less nodes. Probably we should have much more nodes. This was a stat given by my good friend Martin Levy. If you take the population versus number of exchanges, we are far behind in comparison to Europe or some other developed place. So we should probably have a lot more exchanges, not necessarily more in Mumbai or more in Delhi, but spread across the city.
I agree, but at the same time what happens is, I think you need to look at the way the internet traffic itself is changing the flows. Okay, so originally it was mostly web, so it was highly asymmetric, that I would type something and then something would come in. Originally actually it was more symmetric, okay, because it was basically what you are sending, somebody else is giving before the www. But after that, if you see, it became highly asymmetric, and that's why we had this whole traffic planning, etc. 1:4, 1:10, and those type of things. But I think today, when consumers, and this is something that I've been saying for several years, that what we are seeing today in the case of internet is the emergence of an empowerment of prosumers, which is what Alvin Toffler had said almost 50 years back in his book Future Shock, that in future people will be producing as well as consuming. So today we are seeing people prosuming, that is, people are also sharing content. So I think in terms of the traffic, the architecture of the network in terms of capacity It used to be more of download and less of upload. I think now it's slowly changing and should be changing. So I can take more questions and comment. I have no problem as long as Dhruv and Nandini have
Unless
issues in
it's
terms of
yours
time
out of the
management.
venue,
So,
but still we should wrap up.
In a past life, I used to work at ASEAN, and I was talking to Anurag also sometime back. One of my greatest disappointments was like I worked there from 2004 to 2009, and routing in India was badly broken. And as you rightly said, like the asymmetry is actually grown because of video, right? When we say TikTok or when we say YouTube, all of it is now getting consumed over phones and stuff that even we don't see in the US. For example, if you are in Bangalore, you see it's very common that people going around in two-wheelers, somebody sitting at the back watching a Hotstar match live in the PNC. And you don't see that even many places in the West as well. So actually I agree that, you know, having content providers be closer based on my CDN experience would actually push it out to the edge more and give incentive to the content providers also to pair. But because that policy has not been there, and also because the interconnectivity has not been there. I used to work in the measurements department, and often we used to see that a lot of the traffic used to go via Amsterdam, via Heathrow, via Singapore, which was most common. And it was really bad because I'm sending my traffic from Bombay or Bangalore to Delhi. It doesn't have to go to Amsterdam.
You're right.
And from what I see, at least last couple of channels that I participated, the situation has gotten slightly better, but not a whole lot better.
But look at it this way, ultimately it's the ISP's choice, okay? So if I want to take my traffic 7 times around the world and then bring it back to Kolkata, that's my choice, okay? And if my customers don't like it, they can as well go somewhere else. So the other thing is this, and the very reason that we had set up Nixie at that point of time was this, that this was a challenge. Second thing is, when you're talking about CDN, etc., this was again all of these things, I mean, not probably in the way we are looking at it today, but way back in 2004 in the CIA report, we had mentioned all these things. If you want, you can look at the April 2004 report of 29th April 2004 recommendation of TRA on broadband in India. You'll see all these points there also. Yeah.
So I think I'm the last.
Okay, again you're the last. Okay.
So does an IX in India require a license to operate?
No.
So we are very clear on that.
No, Nixie doesn't have a license. Very simple.
Okay, so then, thank you.
Thank you.